He thought his canine was just digging, but Ellie found a 26-year-old secret that changed everything. When retired Detective Cole Bennett's loyal K9 unearths a human skull in his backyard, he unknowingly reopens a case that was never meant to be solved. The remains belong to his late wife's sister, Emily, whose mysterious disappearance was buried under layers of corruption. As Cole digs deeper, he becomes the target of powerful forces willing to kill to keep the truth hidden. With his trusted dog by his side and a city against him, he must race against time to expose a web of lies before he becomes the next one to disappear. But when the truth finally comes to light, he realizes justice comes at a cost, one he may not be ready to pay. The wind pressed against the tall pines that surrounded Cole Bennett's home, rattling their branches like restless fingers against the glass. The cabin, nestled deep in the woods outside the city, was meant to be a place of peace, a retreat from years spent chasing criminals through dark alleys and standing over crime scenes stained with loss. He had left that life behind, or so he thought. Cole sat on the porch, watching his old partner, Diesel, pacing the backyard. The dog had been at it for days, scraping at the earth with a persistence that was becoming impossible to ignore. Dirt clung to his fur, and his nose remained low, pressing into the damp soil. "Diesel," Cole called out, his voice firm but laced with exhaustion. "Come inside." The dog didn't even pause. He dug harder, sending loose soil flying behind him. Cole sighed, setting his mug of black coffee on the wooden railing. The steam curled into the cold air as he rubbed a rough hand over his face. Diesel had always been a disciplined partner, trained to detect danger and track what others couldn't see. But lately, something had shifted. It wasn't just a dog's restlessness, it was purpose. Something beneath the surface was demanding to be found. Pushing himself up from the chair, Cole stepped into the yard. The ground was damp from last night's rain, soft beneath his boots. Diesel paused just long enough to look up, his dark eyes locking onto Cole's with an urgency that made his stomach tighten. "All right," Cole muttered, grabbing the rusted shovel leaning against the porch steps. "Let's see what's got you so worked up." The first few scoops were easy, just layers of damp leaves and loose soil. But as he dug deeper, the resistance grew. Something solid, something wrapped in time itself. Cole's breath came slower, his pulse steady but alert. He reached down, brushing away the last of the dirt with careful fingers. The cloth was brittle, frayed at the edges. He pulled gently, revealing something pale beneath it. A curve, smooth, yet unmistakable. A skull. The weight in his chest tightened as he stepped back, his grip on the shovel firm. Diesel let out a low, rumbling noise. Not a growl, not quite a whine. A warning. Cole crouched down, staring at the remains with the kind of knowing that only years on the force could bring. He had seen enough buried secrets in his time, enough to understand that some were never meant to surface. He swallowed against the dryness in his throat, forcing himself to stay still. The past had a way of creeping back, no matter how deeply it was buried. By the time the authorities arrived, flashing lights cut through the darkness that had settled over the property. The crime scene team moved in quickly, securing the area, setting up floodlights that bathed the backyard in an artificial glow. A forensic investigator knelt beside the remains, gloved hands working with quiet efficiency. "Judging by the state of decomposition, this body has been here for decades," she said, her voice neutral, factual. "We'll need to run tests, but this is old, really old." Cole nodded, his jaw tight. He didn't need tests. He had seen enough missing person files, enough cold cases, to know that time didn't erase the truth. It only delayed it. When the medical examiner carefully lifted the remains, Cole caught a glimpse of something tangled in the cloth. Something small, metal, gleaming dully under the harsh light. A necklace. His breath hitched. He knew that necklace. Knew it because he had seen it before, hanging from the neck of someone who had disappeared 26 years ago. Emily Rhodes, his late wife's sister. The pieces clicked together in an instant, forming something cold, something that had been waiting just beneath the surface of his memory. Emily had vanished in 1998. No leads, no traces, just gone. And now, here she was, buried in his backyard. Cole straightened, forcing his breathing to remain steady as the weight of it all settled over him. This wasn't just a discovery. This was a warning. That night, after the authorities had left, Cole sat in his kitchen, staring at the old case file he had pulled from a locked drawer. The pages were yellowed, the ink smudged in places from years of handling. Emily's face stared back at him from a grainy black and white photograph, a young woman with bright eyes and a quiet smile. He traced a finger along the edge of the paper, the past pressing against him like an unshakable presence. Someone had buried her here. Someone had wanted her to stay hidden. And now, after all these years, Diesel had pulled her back into the light. The phone rang, shattering the silence. Cole reached for it, his fingers wrapping around the receiver. He didn't recognize the number. He shouldn't have answered, but he did. For a moment, there was only the crackle of the line, a breath, a pause. Then a voice low, steady. "You shouldn't have done that." The line went dead. Cole didn't move, didn't breathe. The weight of the past had already begun pressing in, and something told him that this was only the beginning. Outside, Diesel lifted his head, ears sharp, nose twitching as if catching a scent only he could understand. Not far from this, Cole sat at the kitchen table, his fingers tapping against the edge of Emily's case file. The words on the page blurred as memories resurfaced. His late wife, Anna, crying on their porch, waiting for a call that never came. Emily had been more than just her sister. She had been her anchor. And when she vanished, something inside Anna had broken. Diesel lay on the floor beside him, his breathing slow, his body still recovering from the night before. The dog hadn't moved much since they'd found Emily's remains. He sensed it too. This wasn't over. Cole reached for his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found a name he hadn't dialed in years. Vanessa Tate. The line rang twice before she answered. "Cole." "Yeah." A pause. Then, "Tell me you didn't just wake up an old case." Cole exhaled through his nose. "I need to talk. I'll meet you in an hour." The diner was nearly empty, save for a few truckers nursing cups of coffee. The scent of burnt toast and stale grease clung to the air. Cole slid into a booth near the back as Vanessa walked in, her sharp eyes scanning the room before landing on him. She looked the same, shoulder-length dark hair, no-nonsense expression, and a presence that still carried the weight of a badge. She sat across from him, setting a folder on the table. "You know this isn't just some cold case, right?" Cole nodded. "They buried her in my yard." Vanessa's mouth pressed into a thin line. "Emily was last seen near your property before she vanished." She tapped the folder. "Problem is, the official reports don't match what I remember. Files were wiped, records incomplete." Cole's jaw tightened. Someone covered it up. Not just anyone. Vanessa leaned in, lowering her voice. Emily was dating Marcus Vance back then. Cole's stomach twisted at the name. Vance had been a rising businessman at the time. Charming, wealthy, untouchable. Now, he was a senator with deep ties to the kind of people who made problems disappear. Cole took the folder, flipping through faded reports. Witness statements had been altered. Some were missing entirely. Vanessa watched him. The people who spoke back then either changed their story or disappeared. Cole ran a hand through his hair. "You're saying if I keep looking, they'll come after you." Back at the cabin, Diesel barked before Cole even reached the front door. The dog stood near the couch, fur bristled, a low growl rumbling from his chest. The lock had been forced open. Cole stepped inside, scanning the room. Papers were scattered across the floor. Drawers had been pulled open, their contents dumped out. The case file, Emily's case file, was gone. Someone had been inside. Diesel sniffed at the floor, his tail rigid. Cole knelt beside him, spotting a small object near the doorway. A cigarette butt, the filter stained with red lipstick. He picked it up, his mind working through the possibilities. Vanessa's warning echoed in his head. "They'll come after you." This wasn't a break-in. It was a message. That night, Cole sat on the porch, his rifle resting against the wooden steps. Diesel lay beside him, ears flicking toward every sound in the woods. The phone rang. Another blocked number. He answered. "You don't listen," the voice said. Cole gripped the phone tighter. "Who are you?" A short chuckle. "Walk away." The line went dead. Cole stared into the darkness beyond the trees. Whoever had buried Emily wanted her to stay buried. But it was too late for that. Sometime after midnight, Diesel let out a low bark. Cole stood, rifle in hand, scanning the yard. The dog moved stiffly toward the back door, sniffing at something on the ground. A piece of raw meat. Cole's stomach turned. He grabbed a towel, lifting it carefully. The smell was off, chemical, unnatural. Poison. Diesel whined, his eyes dull, his body sagging with exhaustion. His breaths came unevenly. Panic surged through Cole as he scooped the dog into his arms, rushing to the truck. Tires spit gravel as he sped toward the vet clinic. The vet worked quickly, pushing fluids, running tests. Hours passed in tense silence. Cole paced the waiting room, his hands clenched into fists. Finally, the vet emerged. He's lucky. If you'd gotten here any later, she trailed off. Cole nodded once, too drained to respond. This wasn't just a warning. They wanted Diesel dead. They wanted Cole to know they could take more from him. But he wasn't walking away. Someone had buried Emily. Someone had erased the truth. And someone was afraid of what Cole might find next. Cole read the message again. You're making a mistake. It was the same warning, the same threat, but now there was no doubt. Someone was watching. Someone knew exactly what he was doing. He set the phone down and reached for the case file Vanessa had given him, flipping through the worn pages. The further he read, the more the details gnawed at him. Names were missing. Witnesses had disappeared. And then, at the bottom of one of the reports, a name caught his eye. Officer Samuel Dwyer. The report claimed he had submitted evidence in Emily's case back in 1998, but the official records listed no such thing. Cole knew Dwyer, or at least he had known him. A quiet man, kept to himself, but had an eye for detail. If anyone had kept something from that case, it would be him. The address wasn't hard to find. Dwyer lived in a small house on the outskirts of town, tucked behind an overgrown yard. Cole parked a few houses down, stepping out into the cool afternoon air. The place had a stillness to it, unnatural in the way empty homes feel when they aren't supposed to be empty. He knocked twice. No answer. He tried the door. Unlocked. A bad sign. Inside, the house was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that made sense. The air was stale, heavy. A plate of food sat untouched on the kitchen table, the kind of detail that told him whoever lived here hadn't left by choice. Then he saw the body. Dwyer was slumped in his chair, a pistol loosely resting in his hand. A single gunshot wound marked his temple, blood dried against the wrinkled skin of his face. The gun was placed too perfectly, the scene too neat. Suicide. That's what they wanted it to look like. Cole's gut twisted. Someone had gotten to Dwyer first. But why? Because of what he knew, or what he had kept. Cole's eyes swept the room. If Dwyer had held on to anything from Emily's case, it wouldn't be in plain sight. He moved quickly, sifting through papers, pulling open drawers. The place had already been searched, but not by someone who knew what they were looking for. Then, in the closet behind a stack of old newspapers, he found it, a metal lockbox. He grabbed it and left the house without looking back. Back at the cabin, Diesel watched as Cole pried open the box. Inside, there were only a few things: a cassette tape, an old badge, and a worn envelope with a name scribbled on the front. Emily Rhodes. Cole pulled out the cassette and turned it over in his hands. Tapes like this weren't used for regular reports. This was personal. He said in his old tape recorder, pressing play. A faint hiss crackled through the speakers, followed by a voice. Dwyer's voice. If you're hearing this, I'm dead. Cole leaned forward. I kept this because I couldn't let it go. Emily Rhodes didn't just disappear. She was murdered, and I know who covered it up. The tape clicked. A pause before Dwyer continued, his voice steady but burdened. Her boyfriend, Marcus Vance, had connections, even back then. But he wasn't the one pulling the strings. It went higher. Someone in our own department buried the case. Someone who made evidence disappear. Someone who made witnesses change their stories. Cole's fingers curled into fists. I have proof. The real report, not the one they filed. If you're hearing this, you need to find it. I kept it safe, but if they found me, they'll find it too. Look for the old case locker at precinct storage. It's still there, unless they get to it first. The tape cut off with a final hiss before the recorder clicked to silence. Cole sat still, staring at the wall. His former police captain, Warren Holt, had been in charge of the case back then. Holt had urged him to let this go, to stop digging. But now, it was clear, Holt wasn't just warning him. He was part of it. The next morning, Cole parked 2 blocks from the precinct. The storage facility was attached to the main building, an old concrete structure that had been used for evidence back when filing cabinets and paper were still the norm. If Dwyer was telling the truth, the missing report would be in one of those cabinets. Cole kept his head down as he walked through the lot. He still had friends in the force, but not the kind he could trust with this. Inside, the room smelled of dust and stale paper. Rows of metal shelves stretched from wall to wall, filled with old case files, some untouched for decades. Cole moved quickly. The filing system was outdated but predictable. Cold cases were in the back, archive cases to the left. He ran his fingers along the labels. Rhodes, Emily. He pulled the folder free and flipped it open. Empty. He cursed under his breath. Someone had already taken it. A sound behind him made him freeze. Footsteps. Cole turned just in time to see two men step into the room. Not cops. Suits. The kind that worked for people like Vance. Mr. Bennett. One of them said, his tone almost casual. You're looking in the wrong place. Cole's pulse stayed steady. I don't think I am. The man smiled, but there was no humor in it. You don't want to do this. Cole glanced at the empty folder in his hand. I already did. The man sighed, reaching inside his jacket. Cole didn't wait to see what he was pulling. He moved fast, slamming the metal drawer shut and sending it into the man's gut. The guy stumbled back, and Cole grabbed the other by the wrist, twisting hard until he heard pop. The man yelped, but Cole was already moving, knocking him into the shelf and sending files crashing to the floor. By the time the first man regained his footing, Cole was already out the door. He didn't stop running until he reached his truck. As he sped away, he checked his phone. A new message. Unknown number. You're making a mistake. Cole gripped the wheel. No. The mistake had already been made, 26 years ago when they buried Emily's truth. Cole sat in his truck, gripping the steering wheel. The precinct break-in had made one thing clear. He wasn't just chasing the truth anymore. He was being hunted for it. The empty case file, the men in suits, the warnings, they all led to one place. Marcus Vance. The name had been a stain on the original case, a thread that should have unraveled everything. But someone had buried it. Now, Cole had to dig it back up before they buried him too. The next stop was the police archives. If anything still existed, it would be there, hidden where no one had thought to look. He checked his side mirror. No tails, no strange cars. Still, he felt eyes on him. Diesel lifted his head from the passenger seat, ears up, sensing something. Cole tightened his grip on the wheel and pulled onto the road. The archive building was old, tucked away behind the main precinct, forgotten by time. It was meant for records that no one cared about, things the department didn't bother to digitize. But that also made it the perfect place to hide evidence. Cole stepped inside, the scent of old paper and dust filling his nose. Rows of metal shelves stretched down the long room, dim yellow lights casting soft pools of light over forgotten files. He moved quickly, scanning labels, searching for any mention of Emily Rhodes. Most of the cases were unrelated, but then, in a locked drawer near the back, he found something. A ledger. He flipped it open, running his finger down the names. Each line detailed bribes, falsified reports, cases marked as solved when they weren't. The signatures belonged to high-ranking officials, businessmen, and politicians. And at the center of it all, Marcus Vance. The book shook slightly in his hands. This was proof, the kind that didn't just expose corruption, it could burn everything down. Then Diesel let out a low, sharp bark. A warning. Cole ducked just as gunfire shattered the air, ripping through the metal shelves. Papers flew into the air, files collapsing onto the floor as Cole rolled behind a desk, his pulse hammering in his ears. More shots followed, hitting the cabinets where he had stood seconds before. They weren't here to scare him. They were here to kill him. Diesel growled, low and steady. Cole pulled his pistol from his holster and peered around the desk. Two men, both dressed in black, their movements too precise for street criminals. These weren't corrupt cops covering their tracks. They were professionals. Cole fired first, hitting one in the shoulder. The man spun back, crashing into a shelf, while the second ducked for cover. Diesel lunged, sinking his teeth in the man's arm before being kicked away. The distraction was enough. Cole fired again, taking the second shooter down. Silence settled in, broken only by Diesel's heavy breathing. Cole grabbed the ledger, stuffing it into his jacket before rushing out the back door. He didn't stop running until he reached his truck. The message was clear. This wasn't just about covering up a crime anymore. They wanted him dead. Vanessa sat at her kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. She had ignored Cole's last two calls. She knew what he wanted, and she knew the risk. Getting involved meant putting herself in the crosshairs of people who didn't care about rules or consequences. But then Cole sent her a picture, a page from the ledger. Her hands tightened around the cup. Warren Holt's name was on it, the man who had trained her, the man who had led their precinct for years, the man who had told her to leave the Rhodes case alone when she first joined the force. Now, she understood why. Cole's name flashed on her phone again. This time, she picked up. "I need you," he said, his voice steady but edged with something deeper. Vanessa swallowed hard. "Where are you?" They met in an old parking lot outside a diner, away from cameras and crowded streets. Cole tossed the ledger onto the hood of her car. "Tell me I'm wrong," he said. "Tell me this doesn't go all the way to the top." Vanessa flipped through the pages, her expression darkening. She let out a slow breath, then looked up at him. "You're not wrong." Cole nodded. "Then help me." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, finally, she closed the book. "What's the plan?" They worked through the night, piecing together encrypted records from the ledger, names connected to disappearances, bribes linked to politicians, and buried within the details, something Vanessa hadn't expected. Anna Bennett. Vanessa's stomach twisted. "Cole, your wife. She was looking into this before she died." Cole's breath hitched, but he didn't speak. He reached for the file, his hands steady as he flipped through it. His wife's name appeared more than once, linked to unofficial reports, late-night database searches. She had been digging before her death. And then, another detail emerged. Anna's car accident hadn't been an accident at all. The report showed inconsistencies, missing footage, altered autopsy notes, no toxicology results. It had been staged. Cole's fingers tightened on the paper. His wife hadn't just lost her sister. She had tried to get justice for her, and someone had made sure she never could. Vanessa placed a hand on his arm. "We take this to the press." "No," Cole's voice was cold, determined. "We need more." Tracking down a loose end was never easy, but Vanessa had a name. An ex-officer from their precinct, a man who had retired early and disappeared from public life. If anyone had details on the cover-up, it was him. Cole and Vanessa found him in a rundown motel on the edge of town. The man, gray-haired and heavy-set, answered the door with wary eyes. "You shouldn't be here," he muttered, stepping back. But Cole and Vanessa pushed their way inside. "You were there," Cole said. "You saw what happened to Emily Rhodes." The man's lips pressed together, his hands shaking as he reached for a cigarette. "You don't understand. It's bigger than Vance. Bigger than the department." Cole took a step forward. "Then tell us." The man swallowed, looked between them, then finally spoke. "Emily found something that would have ended Vance's career. He had no choice but to." The window shattered. A bullet tore through the man's skull before he could say another word. Vanessa hit the ground, pulling Cole down with her, as another shot blasted through the doorframe. Blood pooled beneath the old officer's body, his final words never spoken. Cole didn't move. The old officer's body lay crumpled on the motel floor, blood pooling beneath his chair. The shooter had been precise, professional. One shot, one kill. A warning. Vanessa pressed herself against the wall, gun drawn, eyes sharp. "We need to go. Now." Cole's jaw was tight, his fists clenched. Another lead gone. Another witness silenced. He wanted to scream, but there was no time for rage. He grabbed the ledger and moved toward the door. As soon as they stepped outside, Vanessa spotted an unmarked sedan idling across the street. She yanked Cole back just as the driver's side window lowered. A flash of movement. The barrel of a rifle. They dove behind a row of trash bins as a shot blasted through the air. The pavement cracked where Cole had just been standing. "Move!" Vanessa shouted, pulling him toward the alley. Bullets tore through metal as they ran, their boots pounding against the asphalt. A car engine roared to life behind them. They sprinted for the truck. Diesel barked, sensing the danger, his body tense in the passenger seat. Cole swung the door open and jumped behind the wheel. Vanessa barely made it in before he slammed on the gas. Tires screeched as they sped away, bullets chasing them down the street. 10 minutes later, they pulled off the road, parking behind an old gas station. Diesel licked his paw, his breathing heavy from the chase. Cole leaned back against the headrest, trying to steady himself. "They cut off everything," Vanessa said, checking her phone. "Your bank accounts are frozen. Your phone is compromised. They're shutting you down." Cole nodded. "They want me desperate. And it's working." He turned to her. They killed my wife, Vanessa. They buried Emily, erased the truth, and now they're hunting us because we won't stop. He pulled the ledger from his jacket, flipping to the names. Holt knows everything. He helped Vance cover it up. He's the only one left who can confirm it. Vanessa hesitated. You think he'll talk? Cole's eyes were cold. If he wants to walk away from this alive, he will. They found Captain Warren Holt at a bar on the city's outskirts, nursing a glass of whiskey, shoulders hunched like a man carrying too much weight. The room was dim, the smell of alcohol thick in the air. Cole walked straight to him, slamming the ledger on the table. Holt barely flinched. It's over. Holt glanced at the book, then at Cole. You have no idea what you're up against. I know enough, Cole shot back. Emily found out about the trafficking ring. Vance ordered her killed. You buried the case. Holt exhaled through his nose, fingers tightening around his glass. Vance owns the courts, the police, the mayor's office. You take this public, they'll drown you in discredit and counterclaims. Cole leaned in, voice low. Then tell me something I don't know. Holt looked away. A lifetime of guilt lined his face. Emily had proof. She was going to meet a reporter the night she disappeared. I don't know what she had, but it was bad enough for Vance to make sure she never spoke again. Where? Vanessa asked. Holt sighed, rubbing his temples. Storage facility. Unit 14. It's off the books. Cole stared at him. And my wife. Holt hesitated. Then, quietly, she got too close. Cole's vision blurred with rage. But before he could react, his phone vibrated in his pocket. A single text message. Trade the evidence. Or Vanessa dies. They reached the warehouse within the hour. Diesel sniffed the air, ears twitching, already sensing something was wrong. Cole scanned the building. Rusted metal, shattered windows, the kind of place where people disappeared. Vanessa was inside. Somewhere. Cole gripped his gun and moved in. The first guard barely had time to react before Cole took him down. The second was smarter. He reached for his radio, but Diesel leapt, dragging him to the ground before he could sound the alarm. Cole moved deeper inside, heart hammering as he scanned the darkness. Then he saw her, Vanessa, tied to a chair, bruises lining her face. A man stepped forward. Clean suit, slick back hair. Marcus Vance. You should have stayed retired, Bennett. Cole raised his gun. Let her go. Vance smirked. Or what? You'll shoot me? In a room full of my men? Cole didn't answer. Instead, he tossed the ledger at Vance's feet. Everything. Every bribe. Every lie. Every body you buried. Vance barely glanced at it. The press won't touch it. I control the system. Cole smiled coldly. Then let's take this outside. The warehouse doors burst open to flashing lights, news cameras, and a growing crowd. Cole had tipped off the media before arriving. If the system wouldn't take down Vance, the people would. Vance stepped out, adjusting his tie, his face shifting into practiced confidence. But then, a voice rang out. One of the guards, shouting into his radio. Sir, the file. Too late. Cole played the final recording on his phone. Vance's own voice filled the air, detailing the murder of Emily Rhodes, the trafficking ring, the corruption. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Police cars screeched to a stop. Officers flooded out, their faces unreadable as they listened to the confession. Vance turned, wild-eyed. You can't prove. Diesel lunged. Vance hit the pavement, screaming as Diesel sank his teeth into his arm. Officers moved in, tearing them apart, forcing Vance to the ground. Handcuffs locked around his wrists. Cameras flashed, voices shouted, the system closing in at last. Cole watched as Vance was dragged to a squad car, his face pale, his empire collapsing in real time. Justice. Finally. But not without cost. Vanessa sat in the back of an ambulance, holding her ribs, wincing as the medics checked her over. Cole stepped up beside her. You okay? She gave him a weak nod. We got him. Cole looked out over the city, over the flashing lights and chaos. They had won, but the scars would never fade. The people they lost, the lives destroyed, it would never be enough. As he turned to leave, Diesel at his side, Vanessa called out. Cole. He paused. She met his eyes. You were right. The truth never stays buried. Cole took a slow breath. Then he walked away, the past behind him, the weight of it all settling deep in his bones. Some things should have stayed buried. But not this. Never this.